here with our forum. I see a lot of new names here also. I will actually open by talking a little bit what the MIT Global Humanities Initiative is, and then what the origins of this particular pillar are. And then we'll be diving into the two projects we already shared with you in the announce, namely the Atlas of Human Literatures and World Poetries of the Neighborhood, where we are really looking actively for collaborators and look forward to discussing that. I'm also very glad that we'll have a student from MIT who will actually be talking about her experience with the World Poetries Project that we are starting now, so that you get a very concrete sense of what that project is about and how in particular also students are involved. So first of all, what is the Global Humanities Initiative? And let me quickly share here. And you can see this on our website too. Can you see this? Or let me see, there's a strange thing here. Can you see this? Yes, good. So the Global Humanities Initiative, we were founded basically about 4 years ago at MIT. And what we care about in a nutshell is to pair cultural historical evidence. So evidence that comes through the treasure house of human experience in the form of texts and artifacts and community rituals to the present day, to pair that with modern technology tools. We'll of course be talking about AI too, how that leverages what we are doing to drive global human flourishing. There's no doubt that in these day and age, human flourishing is threatened in many different ways through very concrete threats and some threats that are much less palpable, but that have to do with the breakdown of our transnational organizations, a lot of our diplomacy, and also challenges to our education system. And in that sense, we need incubators and spaces where we try out how to actually rethink how we ourselves function as humans, how we relate to others, how states in the world relate to each other, and how we can all turn this towards human flourishing and planetary stewardship for a shared positive future. So at the moment, we are actually made up of 3 larger platforms. And our first platform that's emerging now is actually a neuro-humanities platform, where we care a lot about the challenges to our human agency through stress, mental health crises, and the kind of challenges to emotional regulation for ourselves, but also for our leaders, for example, and a lot of people dealing with stress. I'm not going to show you statistics now, but this will resonate. So this platform brings together basically humanists who study and social scientists who really study the human condition in the past and present and for the future with neuroscientists, and we are developing tools actually to help better regulation, including what we call the humanities workout. People always go to the gym because they think they need to only exercise their bodies, and we are developing a humanities workout. Stay tuned for us. We'll have events around that in the spring. The second platform takes actually the kind of individual self-regulation to the collective level. This is a so-called cultural diplomatics platform where we have several labs where people first study what diplomatic systems have existed in world history. How can we actually extract from there strategies that have helped human flourishing and planetary stewardship and that decrease war and suffering? And how can we then bring this into training of diplomats, future diplomats, and really into the public sphere? And especially this spring, I'm working in Geneva with several units there, the UN, the Geneva Science and Diplomacy Anticipator, and directly other bodies in Geneva, really, to bring diplomatic intelligence, this concept we are developing through historical explorations, but then also tool building, really AI tool building for training for diplomats, to bring this into real practice. So the third platform is then, this is the big question. We have the individual, we have the collective communities all the way up to the transnational level. But then the biggest question is, how do we change our universities? How do we change our training, really, of future generations to have that kind of knowledge that's needed? IQ, EQ, emotional intelligence, DQ, diplomatic intelligence. And this is what we call the universe of the future. I'm not saying this is MIT, not at all. It is emerging now in many different places. What should we be doing about our education, about our research? And we call this the STEMMA platform, where we add, this is very MIT style, STEM, and the arts and humanities. So it's actually mind, hand, and also heart. And the idea here is to move beyond STEAM, which is STEM plus the arts, a paradigm that in pedagogy has been quite successful, but also take it really to the research level now, and not just have the arts as something that's creative, but add the humanities that bring questions of value. We need a compass for human flourishing. We need values to actually drive our world into good directions. That also involves cultures and their histories, for the better or the worse, for ethnic conflicts. We need to understand those. That's why we need to add the H there, and stemma in Greek means the Greek, the tree, a tree of knowledge almost here that goes together, and we're experimenting for that. So, and then we have all kinds of different smaller units here that I'm not going to go into in detail that actually contribute. We are really a community that works together, that incubates around all of these issues, and each of these pillars also has their own projects. And here we are, humans and their literature is actually also going into neurohumanities to some degree. I'll be talking about that. We are running this forum series where each month approximately we have one of these pillars introducing actually their projects and inviting more people in. And now to finish up very quickly, here's our website where to find us. We have this event, and we have some upcoming events. Just showing you very quickly here. If of interest, there's going to be a master class in 2 weeks, actually, with a very renowned Korean poet, Choi Dong-ho, on the future of modern Korean poetry in the digital age and the meaning of poetry songs. This is an in-person event at MIT in conjunction with a classical Chinese course I'm teaching. And then the other upcoming event is here, actually coming more out of neurohumanities and also classical medicines, an event, a great lecture here, masterclass on Taoism and early herbal medicine, and a visit of the New England School of Acupuncture. That is the only, as far as I know, school of traditional Chinese medicine in the U.S. that is part of a regular medical school, which is really an inroad into things. If you want to connect with us, you can actually sign up for our, let me see, I have to go back once more, sign up for our mailing list here, and also YouTube. This is where also this forum is going to be posted, and you can actually find this if you cannot spend all the time with us here today. So this is what the Global Humanities Initiative is, and I now want to start us off by talking a little bit about the origins of our pillar today and the kind of context within the Global Humanities Initiative. And let me see. Can you all see this? So about 3 years ago, let me see. Can you see this? Yes? Good. So about 3 years ago, we started out as a pillar that was actually called the Lives and Deaths of Literary Cultures. And the whole idea was to really, rather than just focusing on either the traditional categories of authors and genres and periods and all these kind of good stuff that comes from historiography, literary historiography of the 19th century, or focusing on kind of theoretical paradigms that we try to apply top down in a certain way, we were really interested in asking the anthropological question. What is literature in many different cultures? What different functions, similar or also divergent and diverse, has it really had? And how do literary cultures arise, wax, wane, disappear, reinvent themselves? So that was kind of our question. And we started out from, luckily, some change has happened in the last 3 years, But if you look into kind of global or world literature studies, a lot of it is very tokenistic. Look at this map here. It's very presentist. It's very much focused on the novel. So much of literary culture is really left out of it, no? And so back then we thought about what's really important is to protect and curate, to develop comparative understandings and really develop those tools. And we'll talk more about that because with AI since then developing so much, we can compare at scale and it gets really, really exciting, no? Then, of course, very important as the Global Humanities Initiative, unbiased literature, giving much more voice to past and other literary cultures. That is still an ongoing project in literary studies, although literary studies has been leading the way for the humanities over the past 100 years in going comparative and global. And then most importantly, not just globalizing our archives of works, but really our critical vocabulary and taking critical vocabulary from other traditions that can actually inspire us. So that was the goal back then. We were also interested in institutional questions. This will come up when we talk about the Atlas. Really, like, what are these nodes where production of literature is kind of driven, no, through institutional factors, discourses, states and government, churches, and so on. And we started also doing some mapping work here. There's an example of something we looked at. Persianate is notoriously difficult because it's almost everywhere in Eurasia. How do you map this? What does it mean? And so on. But now, in terms of where we are now with the literature pillar, you will hear now about the two projects we are doing. I should also say that for each of these platforms now, literature is kind of a guiding discipline, I might almost say, or a guiding discourse, namely for our, let me see here. It's a guiding discourse in all of these three different aspects here. So in the neurohumanities, we have projects arising also around question of the narrative crisis. As most of us know, we are not in a crisis of technology. That is not the problem. But we are in a crisis where there are very polarized narratives about what needs to be done, or, how the world should look, what the values should be. And people have their own different narratives, and they pitch them to their own little tribes where there's a lot of empathy for them. And then there are these massive polarizing clashes. And so we have a project also around really the neuroscience of stories and poetry, how we can craft narratives that will be convincing, to address crises. So that's part of the neurohumanities platform also. And then in cultural diplomatics, we have projects around poetry and diplomacy. Anybody who's in East Asia will know that actually for 2 millennia at least, poetry was a major form of diplomacy making within the East Asia, between China, Japan, Korea, and Vietnam. And I always like to say, if you send missions somewhere and you need to, you have meals and you compose poetry together with the diplomats, there's a better chance you're not going to actually shoot at each other because you know the other person. It's very different from the contractual system we live in, the Westphalian system of diplomacy, where people actually mostly interact through contractual means and never meet. No, so their poetry comes in majorly. And then in STEM at the University of the Future, we are really thinking about the massive research that's needed to actually produce materials to sustain a 21st century literature curriculum that's fully global. And our goal there is to really research and develop tools for new pedagogies in 3 areas. One thing is really developing methodologies of representation of literary traditions. So through AI, that allows also comparison at scale, through visualizations like the Atlas. That is one tool we want to develop. The second is really the question of nourishing human connection, which is so much missing in a lot of our institutional kind of philosophies and structures, and which is failing our world. And that is more the World Poetry's project, the kind of poetry of human co-creation, where we find human connection. And we do this through a website. You'll hear more about that. And then the last point is a tool, literature as a tool in particular, doubling the public value of literature. Yes, we have been promoting for decades the literature as the basis for, learning analytical tools, for civil societies, for democracies, and so on. And in addition to that, we also want to push now something that has more to do also with neurohumanities to some degree. In an age of noise and distraction and devices around us, literature can really be this tool of deep work, of honing deep connections, and deep perception. Now, all those kind of things that actually are not just nourishing our minds, but also our bodies and our neurosystems now if we engage in deep work, deep connections, and deep perception. So this is the current, this is the history, a little bit of the pillar, and also really the broader goals within the Global Humanities Initiative. And now I will stop talking and I'll give it here to my wonderful collaborators to talk about the specific projects, the Atlas of Human Literatures. So Ugo Mondini and Michael Andrew, please take it away.
I share my screen now, 1 second. Can you see the slides? Yes. Okay, good morning. My name is Ugo Mondini. I work on medieval and early modern Greek, and I am based in Oxford and at Barton Oaks in Washington, D.C. Today, I have the pleasure of presenting one of the two projects of this pillar, the Atlas of Human Literatures. The project leaders are Michael Angerer, Wiebke Deneke, and myself. But what is an atlas? It is a complex work composed of maps, and typically it emerges only after long periods of intellectual activity, supported by the cumulative efforts of scholars, explorers, and map makers. This is the case of the Theatrum Orbis Terrarum by Abraham Ortelius, whose global map you can see on the slide. The Theatrum was the synthesis of a prolonged process of data collection, analysis, and reconstruction shaped within the historical context of early modern commercial expansion, colonialism, and empire. The maps within an atlas, like any map, are not and could not be a one-to-one replica of any territory, nor an exhaustive inventory of every feature that have ever been reported from a place. A map must be smaller than what it represents, both in scale and in content. It must articulate a perspective, even complex, and operate through selection. It must also provide explanatory means that allow users to orient themselves within an external landscape that is possibly unfamiliar or unknown. One of the main activities of the pillar Humans and Their Literatures of the Global Humanities Initiative is the construction of the Atlas of Human Literatures, a project that seeks to map a world not only of territories, but of literary forms and traditions. The Atlas is conceived as a digital resource that allows us to see literary phenomena not only as they appear at a given moment, but also in their dynamics across time and space, tracing processes of emergence, movement, and disappearance. The result will be an interactive, open source global map that connects traditions that are often studied in isolation. The Atlas makes visible what usually remains implicit, hidden links between distant literary traditions, the movement of genres, stories, and styles, and the layered accumulation of cultural encounters, what we describe following a geological metaphor as the stratigraphy of human literature. This approach brings into view the deeper forces that shape literary production over the long term. The Atlas will be a searchable tool that allows data to be inquired for innovative research and teaching. And this brings us to the question of why this project matters. Literary history today remains deeply fragmented. It is still largely organized along national linguistic lines, shaped by uneven institutional resources around the world, and by forms of scholarship that often develop in isolation from one another. Structural conditions play an important role. Many academics and academic departments are under-resourced. Entire fields are often represented by single specialists, and there is frequently little institutional capacity to engage seriously with literary traditions classified as minor or peripheral. However, there is a growing and widely shared desire to rethink literary history on a genuinely global scale. The Atlas of Human Literature responds to this situation. It is conceived in an open source digital platform to which scholars contribute collectively within a carefully curated and critically supervised framework. Through an editorial board and a group of leading contributors, the Atlas aims to balance openness with scholarly rigor, ensuring both inclusivity and responsibility in the construction of this resource. The Atlas also creates an open space for dialogue among scholars. Begin at the beginning and go on till you come to the end and then stop. If this is the king's advice in Alice in Wonderland, it is worth reflecting on where one can meaningfully begin a project of this kind, keeping in view the prospect of a clearly defined pilot phase. We decided to start not from the unknown, but from the known, much as early cartographers did, beginning from our immediate but not narrow proximities, namely our areas of expertise. Therefore, we will begin with two seas. In my case, the starting point is the Eastern Mediterranean. In Michael's, Anger's, we will speak in a minute, the North Sea. These two regions lend themselves particularly well to comparative approach. They are geographically distant and not directly connected. They share a number of features, high degree of multilingualism, mobility, and connectivity, and their study is supported by rich and well-established scholarly traditions. At the same time, they correspond to the core areas of expertise of two of the three project leaders. In the Eastern Mediterranean, the challenge in my case lies in identifying a limited number of starting points from which to begin mapping and the stratigraphy of this extraordinarily complex area. At present, I propose three broad chronological moments: the century between the 4th and the 1st century, so the 1st BCE and the 1st CE, the period between the 10th and the 12th, and finally the 19th to the 21st centuries. These are conceived as initial layers through which the dynamics of emergence, interaction, and transformation can begin to be visualized. I now leave the floor to Michael.
Thanks very much. Right, in my case, the sea similarly provides a nice snapshot of some case studies that we can sort of integrate into the atlas coming out of my own work. Although there's a lot of, well, quite a bit of groundwork to be done regarding the North Sea, which, unlike the Mediterranean, hasn't really been theorized as a shared literary space. And this is why the atlas is so useful in the way I hope, well, I would wish that it already existed for me to do this project, because it would make this project infinitely easier that I'm just starting on the North Sea between the 7th and the 13th centuries. But similarly, coming out of this project, sort of taking certain snapshots of particular themes or motifs that cross the North Sea between the British Islands, Scandinavia, and then sort of the shore of the continent coming down all the way to Normandy in France. These snapshots will provide nice focal points to start with and start mapping across the North Sea to begin our sort of work on the atlas.
Thank you, Michael. We hope that we conveyed that this project represents an opportunity to support transformative, inclusive vision of the humanities with long-term educational and cultural impact. And this is our brief outline of what lies ahead in the period between 2026 and 2027, with two closely connected lines. The first concerned the development of the digital platform itself, and the other one with workshops and so on. And we very much hope you will join us and take part in this collective effort to map human literatures. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thanks a lot. And we'll go right into actually our second project here, led by Marina Bazzani and Di Wang, and also myself. Please take it away.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Marina Bazzani. I'm based in Oxford, and I'm in this project together with Di Young and Wiebke Deinecke. And we want to present you with the aims of this project. If we move to the second slide. So the main aim of our project is to reassess the place of poetry in today's world. We certainly are all aware that communication is becoming always faster and briefer. We are using telephones, messages, emoji, and so on. So in a way, it may seem counter intuitive to think about poetry, and one may wonder what is the place and function of poetry in the 21st century, because it may seem so far away from usefulness, let's say. However, poetry is very important, and in the next slide, we have, let's say, pointed out a few of the reason why we believe that poetry is so important. I have to admit that all the three of us who are involved in this project work with poetry, so we may be slightly biased, but let's say, certainly poetry is still very important, because since the dawn of times, it has represented an essential human need to express the most intimate feelings and emotion. It has been very often a sharp tool for self-awareness, and also an act of resistance, resilience, and also a tool for learning, because a lot of poetry in my field, which is Byzantine studies, but I think also in the Chinese world, was one of the function of poetry was didactic. So it is very important. It can be still quite important nowadays. What are, let's say, our targets? And if we move to the next slide, we can see what are our goals. Well, we, through this project, which envisage a global online anthology of poetry, we want to make poetry accessible to everybody. And with poetry, lyrics from whatever cultural zone in the world, whatever age, anything that resonates with the person who wants to add to the anthology. We want also to show the relevance of poetry to a younger audience, because possibly younger people think that poetry is quite an obsolete matter. And also through, let's say, putting up in this anthology, loading up poems, comparative poems, and the thoughts of the person who wants to add these poems and explain why they are relevant, why they resonate with them. We hope also to break down barriers and to facilitate connections across different cultures and different borders. And the main goal of this project can also be seen as, let's say, creating something that will help human flourishing and empathy, and also because we hope to involve students and practitioners, let's say teachers, people who are in the literary field. We hope also to create or to help to create a new way of teaching poetry and, let's say, literary studies. And now I'm done, and I pass, let's say, the microphone to my colleague Dee, who will explain more about the project. Many thanks.
Thank you a lot, Marina. And now I'm first going to introduce myself a little bit. My name is Dee Wang, and I'm currently a postdoctoral fellow at Yuelu Academy at Hunan University. And I was invited to this project, first of all, by my mentor, Vipka here, and partly, though perhaps not entirely, because I wrote a comparative dissertation on imperial Roman and early Chinese satirical writings. And now, as I'm turning this work into a book manuscript, I have begun reflecting more broadly and more deeply on the methodology and potentials of comparative literature and poetry as we're practicing this field today and in a highly globalized and digital era. I will first start with a little vignette on my own comparative work and how that led me to this current project. So in my work, that was and is being done in a more traditionally scholarly fashion. I place Imperial Roman and Chinese satirical poems side by side, and focusing in particular on Juvenal's mock epic and Yang Xiong's mock Fu poems, Fu being an iconic long-form poetic genre of early China. So from first glance, these two authors seem to belong to entirely different literary worlds, shaped by very different languages, genres, and writing traditions. However, both lived and wrote under expanding empires. And speaking of empire, which seems to be a very enduring theme of human existence, especially when we just look around at our world today. And what intrigued me was that these poets in the ancient world, without knowing each other or talking to each other, both turned to their inherited high poetic forms against themselves. And by doing so, they exposed moral tension, political anxiety, and cultural contradiction. What immediately becomes clear to me is that different imperial contexts engendered very different satirical expressions. For example, juvenile satire is aggressive, urban, and confrontational. And on the other hand, Yang Xiong, the court poet, and his works within the expansive rhetoric of the Fu, which is a form deeply embedded in cosmological order and imperial ideology. And his satire unfolded within the very language that was meant to glorify the empire. And this obvious difference raises a very methodological question. So why do we even bother to compare poetry and literature before these kind of obvious historical differences are fully settled? And my tentative answer is that literature itself is a form of historical thinking. And rather than waiting for these historical questions to be fully resolved once and for all, which I think undoubtedly is an illusion of itself, and literary and poetic comparison would allow history and literature to mutually illuminate one another. And in my case study, for example, I discovered that satirical form registers historical pressures that formal historiography often kind of smooths over. And through comparison, we began to notice these overlooked historical and literary nuances. For example, how satire negotiates loyalty and critique, how writers survived within systems that they cannot escape, and how imperial power is experienced not just institutionally, but also emotionally. So ultimately, such comparison would help us to imagine a community of sympathy, empathy, and compassion across different cultures and times. For example, writers confronted empire in many places with irony, creativity, and unease, and they found in satire a shared language for living with power without fully consenting to it. So for literary comparison, I believe would allow us to resonate and relate across historical differences, and even when those differences can feel very overwhelming. And rather than trapping those literary and poetic texts within their own periods, comparison would help us release them from this kind of confinement of history and to see how emotions, tensions, and questions of universality travel across time and space. And at the same time, this approach, in my opinion, should not flatten history. On the contrary, if it's done thoughtfully and creatively, it helps us to see through historical context in order to illuminate them more clearly. So by placing works side by side, what once appeared to be natural or invisible within a given tradition or a single tradition becomes legible in new lights through comparative exercise. So another important goal for our projects to make this exercise more available and accessible to the larger community of students and netizens, as Marina was highlighting a minute ago. The literary comparison should not remain, in our opinion, an elitist exercise reserved for just specialists or comparatists. And if we approach comparisons more intuitively and also with thoughtful contextualization, it has the potential to reach more people and to inspire them to recognize our shared human conditions and concerns. So in this way, comparison helps us to build a community of poetry and world literature that is not necessarily grounded in this kind of surface level and artificial sameness that we are confronting today in the globalized world, but in this kind of attentive mode of reading, mutual curiosity, and the shared human engagement across differences. And lastly, so I just want to lay out briefly about our tentative timeline for the project starting now, this January. So we'll use the first months to kind of set up things among our team members, mainly the logistics of how to run the project. And in February, we'll begin to recruit experts and students from around the world. And I see some of you here already today, and welcome. And to take part in small comparative exercises and assignments, which will help us hopefully to generate content for the website. And in March, we can all gather for an online meeting to bring some initial thoughts together, especially around ideas for prototyping the website and getting feedback on the class exercise and assignment prompts that we're designing for them to be more effective to engage students. And throughout the year, and we will continue collecting the results from these assignments and exercises, and later to be visualized through the website. And around the middle of the year, our team will think more seriously together with our tech team about how to build a website. And last but not least, in late June, Marina and I will give a joint online lecture comparing Byzantine and early Chinese in commune poetry, specifically focusing on the theme of flowers, plants, and gardens and trees. If any of you would be interested, please tune in to our talk. And that's my presentation for the day. Thank you.
So thanks a lot. And we'll soon also be opening up for questions, because I'm sure you'll have a lot of questions. But we wanted to give you a real taste of what the World Poetry's Project, will look like. And just to repeat again what the structure is here and the idea, it's going to be a website. What are we going to have on this website? We are going to have comparative pairs of seedlings of seeds now. So we want to have about 50 to 100 little pitches where our students and our colleagues select 2 poems. Can be from any place, any tradition, can be their own poetry, that they actually pose in juxtaposition. And the items of the website that we have decided already on, but we can't show you anything yet. Next year, this time we'll be in a different space, is to have the poems featured, also always in English translation, then have actually a piece on context, where you write about who are these poets, why, how can you even compare them, where does that kind of a ground, and so that's a little bit more academic kind of piece. And then third, we will have video clips where whoever posts these or plants the seeds now talks about how actually these poems really matter more on a humanistic level and on a personal level now. So these are the 3 elements, but how we are going to put them together on the website, this is exactly where we need input and think about like how to really do this. And then comes the last part here about the website. So the original seed for this project was that since 2008, I've been one of the editors of the Norton Anthology of World Literature, which is this 6-volume, 7,000 to 9,000 pages anthology. So we are always curating anthologies for our students now, and that's great. But I was really feeling like we need to crowdsource anthologies. There's so much poetry in the neighborhoods of the world that people want to be sharing. And so what we want to be doing is to run this website for about 2 years, perhaps 1 to 2 years. And then I would love to co-teach a course with whoever is also very involved, where we look at what emerged. what is that anthology that was compiled by the Word, basically? No. So what we are looking for right now is really some of you who might be teachers or, in different contexts, also K-12 or universities, and who would like to do that with students. I've already done that over the past year to have students actually produce these kind of things and get started on this project. So to give you a taste, very concrete, I brought along here one of my students from MIT, Mano Muko. Mano, are you here? And she actually worked on a really interesting juxtaposition of a Japanese and an Albanian poem. No, so Manu, please take it away. And yeah. Oh, does your camera work? Oh no, there you are. You're locked in twice. Good.
I'm on mute for some reason. Yeah.
So, and just very quickly, again, we would love to already show you the website. On the other hand, it's good to show you the building blocks and say this is what we want to be doing, and then we're really going to think out now how to build the whole thing. So Manu is going to talk about the poems and also what she feels like is important about the project. Please, Manu.
I'm having some hard time sharing my slides for some reason.
Okay, let me see. I think
you have a link, but I don't know my computer.
Yeah, I have them actually here. So I'm going to share for you, and you just tell me when we should go forward.
Okay.
And also, please introduce yourself very briefly, who you are, what you're doing, and so.
Well, yes, definitely. So my name is Manushacha Mucho. I'm a student at MIT, and so I'm a student in ECS actually, but
say what that is. So, computer science. We are in a literature space. Yeah.
Is it possible to put it on presentation mode?
Yes, I'll be doing this while you talk.
Yeah, and basically what I'll be going through is work that I've done for a class that I had with Professor Deneke on Asian literature and translation. And that's sort of what I want to present today. So if you can go to the next slide. Basically what this project was, it was a translation and a comparative literature project with a focus on exile. Even though it's a very sort of painful context in literature, I wanted to look at that as a possible force for cultural transformation. And I compared two traditions. So the first one obviously came from the roots of the class. There's this famous Japanese poet from the Heian period called Sugawara no Michizane, who, in his case, we're talking more about individual exile. And what was interesting is that I compared it to something that is closer to my heritage. So I myself am Albanian, and I compared the exile of a more communal or community, in this case of the Arbersh Albanian diaspora. So I guess the project, I will slowly go through explaining who these individual people were and also show the poems and the songs in their original writing, and also my personal translation of that, which is sort of very literal. Next slide. So the next slide, who is Sugawara Michizane, for people that might not know. He was a famous, from the very start, he was a famous Heian poet and a scholar as well. He was born into a very renowned family. He showed early poetic talent, and from the beginning, the poems he would write had a deep connection to nature. And he rose very quickly up the ranks. He became a trusted advisor to Emperor Daigo at the time. Next slide. So what's interesting is that as he rose more in power, because he had a high position in court, he started having clashes with other political rivals. And at least the rumors of the story go, depending on what you're reading, is that because of his rivalry with the Fujiwara clan, which was a very powerful clan in Japan at the time, he was falsely accused, and eventually his enemies, his political enemies, succeeding in exiling him to Daisaifo Kyosho in 1901. It is said that he left the capital at the time, which was Kyoto, in tears. And because of the big pain he felt of being away and exiled, he died in isolation about 3 years later at the age of 57. So what should, I guess, be the end of this poet? It's just the beginning of the legend that came after his story, because the fact that he got exiled became a central focus in terms of the poetic legacy he left behind. Next slide. So what's interesting about him is that he was a real person, I guess, that we have evidence of becoming a deity, even though that sounds weird. So the interesting thing is that perhaps it's a coincidence about what his death happening in Daizafu. There were a series of disasters that struck Kyoto, which at the time was where the capital and the imperial palace in Japan was. Following his death, a lot of people started thinking that all these disasters were attributed to his vengeful spirit. So the court decides to restore his titles posthumously, and they also designed to deify him as a Tenjin-sama. At first, because of his anger and vengeance, he was the god of thunder, but later on he becomes the god of scholarship. And today in Japan, there are over 12,000 shrines dedicated to him. These shrines are often, you can often identify them. There's usually an ox at the front of the shrine when a lot of students would rub the horn or the head of the fox for good luck. And you could also see a lot of cards that students would write, or parents too, to help them pass the exams. So it's very interesting. Next slide. Yeah, and here I have original Japanese poem and translation of a poem he has said to. So the moment he left the capital in Kyoto, it is said that he wrote this poem just as he was leaving about his plum tree, which was a favorite tree he had in the garden. And the legend goes that, I'm not going to read it, but you can look at it at the screen. The legend goes that the plum tree was so touched by the words of its master that, having listened to his poem, it uprooted itself and flew from Kyoto to wherever Michigane was exiled. So this kind of gave rise to the idea of a flying plum legend, and many people still believe that the tree that stands today at the Tenjin Shrine is the original tree that flew from his garden. The Tenjin Shrine, for those that don't know, is allegedly the first shrine of Michizane. It is said that it was built right at the moment at the place where, after he was dead, the cart that was transporting his body stopped. So what's interesting about this story is that at first it's just this idea of a plum tree flying magically to meet its master, but over the years, there's more trees that are added to this legend. So there's poems about a cherry tree that, because of the love Michizane had for the plum tree, withers from the neglect. And then later on, there's a story of a pine tree that, having seen how the plum tree plucks itself to follow its master, feels ashamed and decides to have a similar dedication and follow suit. So here's another poem that translated, that specifically the author, it is later said to have written for the cherry tree that he also loved very deeply. Oh, sorry, next slide. Yeah. And can look at that for a while. And the slide after that one. So what's interesting about this poem is that when I first started thinking, what's interesting about this topic is that where I first started thinking about it is that exile is also a concept that is very close to my particular heritage, and it's very common in Albanian history. So it was kind of interesting to see how there were similarities in the Japanese tradition. So the idea of exile, it applies to Albanians living outside of homeland. And as a consequence of that, we do have a big diaspora in the world. Next slide. And I particularly decided to focus on ethno-linguistic Albanian minority that is settled in southern Italy. So their name is Arboresh, and these are people that migrated in waves between the 15th and 18th century, fleeing the Ottoman conquest of Europe at the time. And they were able to preserve multiple things like language and tradition, and even gastronomy. Next slide. So the song, I couldn't find a poem from this tradition that at least was old enough to compare to Michizane. So I chose a traditional song they have, which is called Moja Bukura More, the English translation being the beautiful Morea. Morea standing for a region which is in today's world, in the present day, is a Peloponnese present day region in Greece. This is one of these oldest Arborish songs. It has been sung for over 600 years, but unfortunately we do not know the author. Next slide. Sorry. So the song, just as with the idea of Michizane's story, the song also undergoes at least 3 transformations that I know of over time. So originally, before the Arborish even migrated from their homeland, this was a song about mourning and about remembrance. It was a song that it would be sang during this festival of the Pentecost, or the Saturday of Souls in the late spring, where mostly groups of women, they would climb up a tree and they would sing this song as part of the rites they would have to honor deceased family members. So next slide. So the next slide is what would be in Albanian, closer to the original rendition of the song, as it was documented in 1708 in the Keuti manuscript. And on the side is my literal translation of how the song could be. Unfortunately, I guess I can't sing it for you, but there are versions of that online. So
can you read for us the first few lines? Just, we want to have a poem in our forum, the original language, just the first 4 lines.
Oh, in Albanian? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Moje bukura more, si të lash e mos të pash. Si të lash, siç të gjeta nga të lash.
Thank you. Great.
Yeah. And yeah. And what's interesting is that, next slide. So this song, like I said, was sang for over 600 years. The version I showed was from 1708. And as time moved on, there were different interpretations. By the time we get to the 19th century, we have this class of Albanian intellectuals that, while they're working for the political interest of the country, in particular in preserving its borders in the European stage, they are working as a diaspora outside of the country and in different countries of the Europe. So as a consequence, they are heavily influenced by the European Romanticism movement that was sweeping the continent at the time. So they see an opportunity aligned with these political ideas, while they do not change the lyrics of the song, and they maintain the ties it had to the Arbors tradition and the Pentecost festival. What they do, they start pushing a different narrative around the song, where at the beginning, if the song was just a funeral lament about a loved one, the loved one is anthropomized into being like the lost homeland, and pushing this narrative that the Arbores were lamenting like their mother or father, like their home, like they could never return to. And what's interesting is that me, myself, being born and raised in Albania and having going through education there, I used to think that this was the sort of more common interpretation for the song. But having researched deeply, so I would assume like the average Albanian probably assumes this is a song to mourn the homeland. But having researched, I was actually surprised that it goes even older and it's a folkloric song. So I suppose it might have been a very powerful interpretation. Next slide. And
no, let me see. What is that?
Oh, there's no next slide.
This is right. Yeah.
The one. Yeah. So and what's interesting is that, so we went 1700s, we were 1800s. There's also been a lot of renewal of interest in the traction of this song in the past 30 or something years, starting with the post-1990s diaspora in Albania. So the reason why 1990 is very relevant is this is the time when we had the regime change. We used to be a communist country and we changed to a democratic country. And what happened at the regime change, despite instability, a lot of people migrated in big waves toward Europe and towards the United States as well, and everywhere in the world. So interestingly enough, there was a lot of renewal from this kind of immigrants in this song. And a lot of the changes, there are many variations as a consequence of it. There are more changes that are happening. So there are changes in instrumentation. People would try to sing the song with instruments of the country they settled in. And what's the most interesting part is that the lyrics also appear to change. In particular, if you were to look the song online on YouTube, let's say, you would find that at this point in history, the funeral verses, as you will see in a moment, have been, so actually, next slide, if you can go to. So you would find, if you find it online, the funeral verses on the previous version have been completely removed. And instead, there's this merge that is done with the second songs, which would come in the third stanza in this one, which turns it into a more romantic song about, while maintaining the traditional elements, it's an Arborish boy, but he's trying to woo like his, I guess, Arborish lover. So the song has completely been transformed from like funeral to like this historic patriotistic lane, so like a love story. And it's sort of interesting why, it's also interesting why for current Albanians, I suppose, that has a more powerful meaning to them to see this romantic sort of erotic point of view to it. And also next slide. And lastly, I basically wanted to talk about why I'm kind of excited that part of the work I did for class would be included in this World Poetry Project. And at least my personal opinion, why I think it's very interesting is that I feel like a lot of people, much like me, I'm electrical engineering and computer science, but I have interest in learning about other people's traditions and other people's literature. But I find myself that even though I'm curious, I don't have a starting point of where to begin. And I feel this project would provide some sort of like low barrier entry that a person can come across the website or can start with a vague curiosity, and perhaps hopefully you will have experts and work that could easily guide you into learning and discovering more. And I think it's also very interesting that we talk a lot about cross-cultural comparisons between traditions, and to me it's very interesting knowing the differences and how it's nice knowing the differences and how you have these novelties that come from different cultures, but it's also very interesting to see how everyone also has a lot of similarities with one another, in particular when we talk about these big questions of life and of, I guess, literature and art, about what is life, what is law, what is the meaning or value of life. I think it's nice to see how different cultures both treat them differently, but also they share the same concerns as everyone does. So yeah, that was my presentation.
Thanks a lot, Manu. I'm particularly glad that, we put some poetic bone here, poetic meat on the bone. So we talked in the broadest terms about really kind of the atlas of human literatures, and then ended up, giving you also some poetry here. So we'll have about, half an hour now for open discussion. And just to summarize again, because this is, of course, a forum that is much broader than a typical lecture would be, in literary studies and so on. So at the moment, really, the front lines where we are working is, of course, the academic front line of literary studies and how we can use this in new ways and transform it, to build something like an atlas or this website. But what are the academic challenges? The second thing is really, I know there are some people on the call who have been leading very, very big, amazing world literature projects. And if we take this from the page into an atlas now, what are the technological challenges? What are the technological opportunities? And how does this kind of drive with cognitive changes too, that, our students and we ourselves are much more visual now. And so what do we need to understand cognitively about the makeup, of younger generations and where things are going to build this technologically? That's the second point. And really the third point about the humanistic value, as has been said, the creating a community of sympathy, empathy, and compassion in literature, really as part of the human species, a form of historical thinking, and something that can be a form of, I know there's a field of that, bibliotherapy, poetotherapy, to ourselves in these difficult times, and to many people who are interested in literature but can really not enter very easily what we produce in these arcane ivory tower of literary studies to some degree. So we open a discussion with any type of question or comments. We really look forward to your curiosity here. Yes, wonderful. Ken, please go ahead and say who you are, because I was just talking about you, people who have led the most amazing big world literary projects. Perhaps you can say a little bit about that as a background for everybody here.
Sure. I'm Ken Senyeri, professor of world literature at Simon Fraser University, and I had the pleasure of working with Vibke on the Wiley Blackwell Companion to World Literature 6-volume project, gathering 300 some scholars to write on various aspects of world literature. That was published in 2020, and we just published the concise version in January. So just hot off the presses right now. So, but thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you all for such conscientious and well-prepared talks. I was fascinated by the whole project, and am interested very much in learning more about it. I do have a kind of a question, though, if you don't mind, and that relates to there seems to be overarching this project the priority on human flourishing, sympathy, empathy, communication, and that's all very, very good. But these are all and then, of course, we go down into historical contexts and texts. But it seems to me that when we talk about something like human flourishing, we're talking about it already from a liberal humanist standpoint, and which is all well and good, but I think it's necessary to be up front about that. And there also seems to be something of a kind of I don't want to say neglect, but certainly a difficult problem that would have to at some point or another be dealt with, and that is that worldviews, cosmologies, religions matter. In other words, they frame the way we talk about exile, for example. They frame the way we talk about various aspects of of literature. And without discussing these things, we assume as normative the liberal humanist framework. And I think that would be an unfortunate thing, because one of the wonderful things I like about this project is the will to genuinely deal with difference, to raise the profile of hitherto neglected cultures and literatures. But that would also, it requires that difficult handling of, as I say, worldviews, cosmologies, religions, what have you. In other words, intellectual frameworks, not intellectual so much as living frameworks, social imaginaries, as Charles Taylor would say. Anyway, that's my comment, and thank you so much for your fascinating project here.
Yes. So I'll actually take the broader question here also for GHI and so on. And then some of the panelists might also want to speak to that. First of all, the literature pillar is not per se only oriented towards human flourishing. I think especially the World Poetries Project, connecting to poetry is emphasizing this a little bit more. However, the initiative as a whole, Global Humanities Initiative, is directed towards human flourishing and planetary stewardship, but very much actually taking in philosophies and religions and all those different kinds of parts. No? And there, you might say, like, why do we bring this in? Because one of the things that are still very much at work in the humanities and certainly in the social sciences are actually legacies from the 19th century about ideas of objective kind of study of human phenomena. And in a moment where unfortunately a lot of humanities and social sciences have not necessarily contributed to avoiding the world we are in now, I think it's very important to think about what are things in these studies of human experience that can be, more descriptive, interpretive, like the humanities, or the social sciences also more prescriptive and modeling. But that can actually help us along the way of human flourishing. And I don't think that's particular like a liberal standpoint, but human flourishing. We had a forum on on the good life. On religion, philosophies, and sciences, they all have actually notions of what human flourishing is. And we're very much engaged with people who really work in religious studies or actually in religious communities and world diplomacy, actually coming out of different religions. So in that sense, it's really, really broad there, the entire initiative. For our literature project, I would say the Atlas, and please Ugo and Michael jump in there, the Atlas is much more academically oriented towards really the representation, the catching of dynamics, of literary developments, and then within the literature pillar, really human flourishing and empathy and all those kind of things come more into fore, really, for the World Poetries Project and that goal of kind of crowdsourcing an anthology with people from around the world. No, but please, is there anybody from the panelists who would like to add to this, further comments to this question and comment here?
Yeah, can I just add
Yes,
a
of
few
course.
comments? I think in my own kind of work, where this kind of relevance of religion and cosmology and the framework of an intellectual tradition really came to the fore is through the study of genres and how do you position those poetry in that kind of intellectual tradition. So I wouldn't say like it's always kind of in the forefront, in the foreground, but it's always in the background, and that's something that I have to grapple with, and all this kind of comparative pairings would have to grapple with implicitly. And I think there is a lot to be said when we do the work, and it will naturally kind of evolve and resurface and surface. Yeah.
Yes, great. Anybody else from the panelists?
I can say that for the Atlas, one of the things that we have to decide, and we are discussing it, is the way of perspective. So I totally agree. And as a scholar who works with pre-modern literature and who works on a literature like the Byzantine literature, where religion and other kinds of literature are very much represented, I totally agree on your points, and I think it's very important to keep them in mind when we try to describe what was around and what is around in an atlas, for in my case, in our case, and in a living anthology, as in Dee and Marina's case.
Great. Anybody else?
Yes, and if I can just add on to that, I suppose the strength of the atlas as we're envisioning it, as it is now, is precisely to allow to bring together these sort of different traditions of thought by drawing on certain, area experts for their respective fields, and then setting those fields side by side and hopefully in connection with each other as the atlas then progresses. So it's going to be a very, very long-term piece of work to actually accumulate all that and to bring in people to contribute to different areas. And that will in itself, I think, allow us to move beyond sort of very set ideas of what certain literary areas look like and how literary study in different traditions is approached.
Yes. Great. And one last thing, Ken, going back to your experience, really, any world literature anthology, or project that is world literary and chronological is like a funnel. You have the Analects, you have the Quran, you have the Bible in volume A. You're not going to have, certain Korean forms of Zen Buddhism and their kind of scripture from the 20th century, no? So in that sense, we have literature with a large L that starts with basically, literature, what we nowadays call literature, historiography, history also, religions and so on. And where in many ways then the question is how to bring this into modernity, And I see Kono Kimiko is here on the call too. We are actually writing a literary history of Japan, where we are going to bring in for the 20th century, as part of literary culture, these lots you draw in temples that actually tell you the fortune. And they're often written in classical Chinese, which is not very legible anymore to most Japanese nowadays. But it's part of literary culture, of this old Latin of East Asia, classical Chinese, and ways that this is still alive. And we think this is part of literary history in the 20th century, But I think that's exactly the question you're addressing. And I'm glad you're saying this, because with Kono Sensei here, we decided we want to have these lots of divination and of fortune telling in classical Chinese in a literary history, because that's a way this literary kind of tradition of 1,500 years is still alive. Yeah. But thank you. This is a very important, thorny, thoughtful problem. Yeah. Sterling Newberry, thank you for waiting. You can go ahead with your question.
I would like to first affirm Ken's observation that liberal humanities is not the only point of view of this cycle, and the other points of view should be brought in, if only to affirm what we are rebelling against as much as rebelling in favor of. My point that I would like to argue for is that crowdsourcing for students will often take the low form of songs, because songs are, of course, literary points of view, and things like rap and so on would be their mode into the idea of literature.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I should point out that one person who has been involved so far is Lupe Fiasco, the rapper from Chicago, who happens to be also at MIT. And he'll be again in town for the spring semester when we'll connect over this project. He's teaching theory and practice of rap. and has expressed great interest in this. And you're right, we'll have probably songs, so we have to think about like, how do you post this, who should be singing this and performing this. Already with Manu and the Albanian song, this came to the fore really, and that's a great point. It would be great to see like poems from the first century, the first millennium BCE, actually kind of paired in a seed, comparative seed with a rap song. But thank you for pointing that out. There's a great potential there. Any other comments from the panelists on that? Thoughts?
Well, as you were saying, a lot of ancient poetry, Greek poetry and so on, was sung to music. So this should be just the natural development. And in any case, it's true that probably many students will start with the rap, but hopefully then looking around the web page, or they may find inspiration in, or their eye can be caught by other things, or they may even produce interesting comparison between a rap song and some other piece of more orthodox poetry, let's say. So this also should be quite interesting and hopefully create something new and interesting to see.
Yes, thank you. Anything else? And for everybody who's interested in this connection between song and poetry and how this morphs and changes in history and how we could bring this into the website now, the event with a Korean poet that's coming out in 2 weeks, he will be talking exactly about the origins of song of a lot of classical East Asian kind of genres and how his poetry is going into music again and that kind of connection now. So that will be the topic there. Yeah. Thanks, Sterling, for bringing that to us. Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Even just reactions. We can also take encouragements, because frankly, what we have set out to do, could be like a team of hundreds of people for a lifetime almost. So that's welcome too. Greg, wonderful. Yes, please. Oh, you are muted.
So my name is Nad, and I am very impressed with the panelists. I thought that they gave incredibly good presentations, and all I want to say is express my heartfelt encouragement for what they're doing.
Thank you so much, Greg. I really appreciate that. I should point out that Greg is a project leader within the Global Humanities Initiative, together with Lenny Milner, who I think is also here, yes, there you are, on diplomatics, in particular in the context of sports, Olympic sport now, so from the classical world, but also bringing this into the present. And in that sense, although you're also very much literary scholars, it's wonderful, that you're here. Thank you for the encouragement. And I want to put in a plug, because you'll be having your forum when again, in February or March? You can look it up on the website now. Actually, you can probably put it into the chat, all the forum events, and Lenny and Greg are going to have a whole thing there on diplomatics and sports. Barbara Wall, please go ahead.
Yeah, hi. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm teaching in Korea. Can you hear me?
Yes, wonderful.
Yeah. I'm teaching in Korean studies in Copenhagen. So I really enjoyed everything today. That was amazing. I was just wondering, if there is somebody who's interested in contributing, what should we do specifically? So is there an email we can write to, or?
Yes. Thank you so much, Barbara, for making that very clear. And I almost think we do want to take more questions, but I almost think it might be good to go back to the slides, showing a little bit what the next steps are for the Atlas in particular. So overall, I think the best thing is to write to the coordinator, the project leaders, and you can also just write to Johan basically and be put on the list, and then you'll be receiving all the information about that. I had the impression, Ugo, that for the Atlas we might it might be good to take some more time so that folks understand how to contribute. Does that make sense for everybody? Or do we have any other urgent questions? So for World Poetry, that was pretty clear. The next steps are actually, having an online March gathering where we really brainstorm on the anatomy of or the ontology, of that website, and get more folks in who say, I would like to actually have a few students contribute and myself contribute. So that's all. Just reach out to us and say that. And then for the Atlas, Ugo, do you want to share again that slide with different steps?
Yes,
To get a sense of, because we talked so much about like how even to operationalize so many different aspects, and I think there's a lot of on the one hand our understanding of how we want to initiate this whole process now, and it would be great to get your feedback on that or questions also.
Yeah, 1 second. Doesn't work the PowerPoint now, but it will, I'm sure.
Yeah. Perhaps while you're pulling this up, should I just...
Yeah, maybe yes.
Yes.
Okay.
So for the Atlas, we are really thinking of a very Hegelian dialectic, as you have probably seen. On the one hand, making sure we start from broad regional granular kind of representation. That's very broad word literary. But then also really kind of starting from very concrete areas where we can think through the methodological challenges, the C's, for example, the 2 C's. And here we go, Ugo, please tell us. And again, this is information of what we'll be doing, but you can also give us input on how to improve on that. And when you then reach out and say you would like to be part of this, and we put you on the email, you'll receive an updated information based on this input also today.
So for the Atlas, we have these things ahead now. So we are discussing the development of the platform. The goals are to form an editorial board, because we think that it's very important that this is open source, but also very much polished way of putting information on the Atlas. And then we have to understand how to create lemmata, how to create select key phenomena. I propose 3 of them for the Eastern Mediterranean. Michael proposed others for the North Sea, to develop the experimental prototypes that are based on our areas of expertise. And I think that this whole process will take us more or less 2 years now. We are discussing how to raise funding for this kind of projects. And in general, if you want to contribute to the Atlas, it's very important that you send a mail to the 3 of us. We can share, I think, our emails afterwards, or they are online.
Well, they're all on the website, no?
They are all on the website.
And so I would suggest, if you're interested in the entire pillar in both projects, write to the pillar coordinators, no? If it's just the World Poetry's project, write to the project leaders there, or the Atlas, no?
Which in the case of the Atlas is very convenient, because we are both the pillar coordinators.
Exactly, very convenient.
So it's very convenient. And we can discuss how you can contribute, and I'm very happy to have more people, and we are very happy to have more people to discuss this. And then what we have ahead are these 3 things, 2 this year and the other one next year, but more things will come, and I'm sure, and we will share this information with you in the future.
Mm-hmm. And just to kind of follow up on this, so for the one part of the Hegelian dialectic, the very broad one, we are very interested in finding regional coordinators now, no? So people who work on macro regional things, like let's say East Asia, no, the Arabic world, different things, and where we can then with them together kind of build ideas about these regions. So that is actually the most important thing there. But already from the beginning, we also really want to get into the messiest types of literary phenomena, where we are really like, oh my God, how are we going to bring this in? How are we going to bring this in? So that is kind of the dialectic here. And also just to mention, you might feel like, oh my God, they're super, super ambitious. We have a prototype workshop in spring 2027. The first meeting, actually, the Atlas Project Feast is online, where we'll also invite, really specialists on the technical side and AI side and so on. This is all online. You can very easily join, just like that. Also, if you're not contributing to the project in any really active way. So with the prototyping next spring, here are two kind of updates. We are fundraising in small and big ways. We are on our way there. And we are kind of goaling, we have the goal to have a 3-year pilot first. So in that sense, hopefully that timeline will kind of stretch out. We'll have more time. However, we do want to prototype as early as possible. Because the earlier you start, the better you know what are the problems, where do you want to go. So the prototyping and the real concrete work, both technologically but also really intellectually, academically, methodologically, will come pretty early on and happen in kind of a lab type fashion now. So Barbara, is that enough input for your question?
Yes, thank you.
Good. Let's actually open for last few minutes of additional questions, comments. We actually had already come up with a long list of questions for you, but you asked us a question, so we can also pursue that further. Then I would like to close and actually thanking you for coming, for listening and kind of, being curious about this project. It's going to be a long way to come. Thanks for the hands and the hearts. We really need them on this path. And so again, our next, oh wow, they're exploding hearts here, which is wonderful. Our next forum is, I think, the February 13th. This is going to be the environment, biodiversity, and planetary stewardship pillar. So please join us for that one if you would like to come along. And let me say again, today's event is really an invitation. If this resonates with you on any level, on any aspect, really get in touch and bring your people on. We are a community that doesn't grow by bringing people on based on their CV, but more people who feel like, wow, this is kind of exciting. This also jives with my work. It helps me do my own specialized expert work in better ways. If you're looking for a community to kind of have really a group of people who are thinking about the hardest problems in literary studies and who enjoy poetry and just reading and on all levels, who care about pedagogy, who care about making a more public and global impact too, this is your community now. Thank you so much, and thanks to our panelists here also. Have a nice day. Thanks for coming. And the panelists, please stay behind for a brief debrief, okay? And if there are other